For our next talk, we've got Peter Jackson on the 5 critical cybersecurity controls you should be having in your ICS environment. Please give it up for Peter Jackson.
Thanks, Billy. Have you got the deck? There we go, lovely. All right, good afternoon. Some nice familiar faces. We'll get some people drifting on, I'm sure. 5 critical controls for cybersecurity. This is some work that SANS ICS have been doing. I'm a SANS instructor. Let's make sure the clicker's working. By way of background, I'm a control system engineer by trade, so we're working in and around ICS for most of my professional career. I lead a team of ICS OT cybersecurity practitioners. I've got consultants, engineers, OT sysadmins on my team, and we exclusively do OT ICS. Quite happy to stay away from corporate enterprise networks. And I'm sure most of you work in corporate enterprise security, you'll complain about the users. We've got far less users in OT and ICS. I'm based in New Zealand, and I'm the founder facilitator of a technical network over there. Really strong passion for the community and supporting the community defence and the industrial space. I'm a SANS instructor for the ICS 515 class. I'm teaching that next in Canberra in June, so if you want to come and listen to me babble on for 6 days talking about active defence and incident response or visibility detection and response, then I'll be most welcome. You'll be most welcome in class. Today I'm going to be talking about industrial control systems, so we might as well get everyone kind of on the same page on what an industrial control system is. Encompass lots of different types of control systems, SCADA systems, DCS, PLC. We've certainly got our own set of jargon, terms and definitions, and all of these things actually mean something. I think sometimes our big fours, our IT, the IT side of the house, can use the terms interchangeably. They do actually mean something. And what you mean by ICS and what I mean by ICS or OT, for example, might be a lot of different things. But kind of at its core, it's around programmable systems interacting with the physical environment, right? Our cyber physical systems is well within kind of the remit of operational technology, as kind of distinct from IT, where we're looking at more database systems. And again, our OT definition can encompass more things such as building management, fire control, physical access, and those sorts of things. This is a view Venn diagram. I like the diagrams on the last slide, thanks Ed. But this is a view around OT. This is a very common view on OT, that it encompasses these sorts of terms, ICS, SCADA, DCS, PLC, et cetera, right? Post-colonial, we're living in a more OT-aware age. I remember doing a presentation for a critical comms conference, and I asked the audience, who's heard of the term OT? And a lot of hands went up. I said, who knows what the O and the T stand for? And most of the hands went down. But I think kind of post-colonial, people are aware a little bit more about control systems, and certainly in this room, those that are doing security for industrial organisations are knowing a little bit more about the OT environment. Did a talk in Singapore about IT-OT convergence is dead, long live IT-OT convergence. So that's the world in which me and my team operate in, the stuff that I teach with SANS. It wouldn't be a conference presentation on IT and OT without a beautiful IT-OT slide. These are very much generalizations. I was talking yesterday, we did some great tutorials on OT-ICS cybersecurity for technical and for managers. And from my perspective, and no genuine criticism of kind of my peers that talk in the space, but kind of in a low maturity space, we've got a CIA, AIC, right? I'm sure all of you are familiar with those terms and that analogy. Often in our OT systems, we care more about availability. Sometimes in corporate enterprise systems, you care more about confidentiality. But those that are working in a critical manufacturing environment, maybe a pharmaceutical environment, the OT systems making the product is the intellectual property of the company, all right? The safety system engineer, I'm a certified functional safety engineer. I've programmed safety systems. I really care about the integrity of that safety command going between 2 safety systems, right? The intertrip, I've done some work on offshore oil and gas facilities, making sure that the trip between the onshore and the offshore platforms is working. I really care about the integrity of that system. Similarly, availability, we work with a lot of different kind of critical and non-critical organisations. Some of them are only operating 5 days a week, 6 days a week. Some of them are only operating kind of 2 or 3 shifts. And if their plant goes down, they can put on another shift. We did a tabletop exercise, OT tabletop exercise with a water company recently. And they said, with this water plant, we can tolerate downtime of days. With this one, we can tolerate downtime of hours. With this one, we only fire it up once a month. Right? So in terms of availability, if there's an impact for that plant that's happening once a month, then their availability impact's pretty low. They're a water company, their confidentiality impact is quite low. So that's my perspective on why I think kind of CIAIC flipped on its head is kind of a low maturity statement. The kind of the next step up, the medium maturity, once you move on from the CIAIC, is safety, reliability, productivity. But of course, they're not kind of Boolean concepts. It's not that we just go tick, 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 right? Even when I was working in the safety space before I got more into security and networking, we understood and acknowledged that we cannot eliminate safety risk, right? And I'm sure that comes as no surprise to you from a security perspective, it's the same from a safety perspective. But what we can do is manage our safety risk within our risk tolerance. We can ensure that when people come to our industrial facility, that they're no more at risk at our industrial facility, even if it is a petrochemical plant or an oil and gas plant. If we're looking at machine safety in a manufacturing environment, they're not more at risk in the environment than at home. But we're never going to eliminate safety risk, and we're never going to eliminate security risk. And so kind of going this kind of nice, easy safety, reliability, productivity type of analogy sometimes works. It's better than nothing, let me be honest. I think where I sit most of the time in this is understand the environment that you're responsible for. Know what matters for the things that you're responsible for, those end users and owner-operators out there. Know your own environment, especially if you're stepping from IT into OT. Get to understand what matters in your business, what the criticality is, what the confidentiality, integrity, availability looks like. And if you're a service provider, again, have those dialogues. The conversation, the people process technology starts with that conversation around having kind of more convergence around the mindsets. But very typically, we see a lot of these things and will feed into how we think about kind of the 5 critical controls for ICS cybersecurity. Where does this come from? Many of you might know that what's now the SIS controls used to be the SANS 20, then it was SIS 20, then it was SIS CSC, now SIS controls. So SANS looked at this and said, hey, we need this for this nuanced thing that we call OT security, ICS security. They actually offered it to SIS. SIS don't really want it. I am working on the SIS controls V8 ICS implementation guide, if those of you that use SIS. But I think most organisations, most industrial organisations have moved on from the fact that this Pandora's ICS isn't worth opening the box on, right? Most industrial organisations realise that their OT systems are their core business and the corporate enterprise is a bolt-on, right? Whether you're manufacturing power, producing widgets, pharmaceutical, running rail systems, that's the core business, and the corporate enterprise is the bolt-on. So maybe our security investment shouldn't be 100% corporate enterprise and 0% OT. Maybe our IT security capabilities could support and enable the OT side. We talked a lot yesterday about how we need to come in with the security as an enabler. I think most IT organisations recognise that. Most IT organisations either have themselves or have heard of when IT has tripped the plant, upset the ICS team. And so there is kind of this divergence, historical divergence. But we do need action, and we do know that the adversaries are more and more targeting ICS and OT. So the SANS team, Tim Conway, Director of ICS Curriculum at SANS, and Robert M. Lee, CEO of Dragos and SANS Principal Instructor, I think. Now he just got a promotion. Went through, and based on actual things that have happened, this isn't theoretical, if you're a SANS instructor, you have to be a practitioner. So based on things that have happened in real world and not just our 6443 series, which is our standard, we've got 5 critical controls. And for those industrial organisations that don't know where to start, this is where you start, right? When I'm doing consulting, I get a lot of where do I even start? 5 things isn't too bad. And we're just going to walk through those today, and especially for those of you that sat through 7 hours of me monologuing yesterday, I will bring in some news stories. And thank you for coming back to learn a little bit more, hopefully, around the critical controls for ICS and OT cybersecurity. Number 1, incident response. I talked yesterday about kind of differing perspectives on the not if but when mindset. I think being prepared for incident response is one of those things that if you're not doing, then you're probably not doing a good job in security. And if you are working in an industrial context or have some industrial cybersecurity responsibilities, then you should think about what ICS incident response looks like. This is not your IT incident response plan. It might be, you might have an organisational incident response plan which caters for your IT, your corporate enterprise, your cloud environment, your database environment. There's lots of different kind of thought processes around how OT is distinct from IT. It's not 100% the same. It's not 100% different. It's somewhere in the middle. So when it comes to incident response, what sort of things do we need to consider? Again, when we look at kind of how IT and OT systems behave differently, respond differently, and that factors into how we're going to do incident response, support, all those stages of incident response in our ICS environment. If you haven't thought about incident response, then doing that, developing a plan, it can be leveraged off your IT plan. It should almost certainly be tied into your emergency response planning. Most industrial organisations have well-established emergency response, man down, earthquake, fire, etc., etc., etc. We should add cyber to that if that's not already there. Do the plant operators, does the control room know what to do if they get a ransomware message on the DCS screen? Do the engineers know what to do if something happens in the engineering workstation environment? Having that plan, being able to test that and exercise that. We talked yesterday with one of the participants yesterday who for 2 years have been trying to talk to their organisation about we should be doing something better in our ICS OT environment. And only after 2 years after doing a tabletop did the organisation actually realise what gaps there were. Again, we've been running tabletops for a while, and it's one of those things that just fleshes it out. One of my recent tabletops, I was working with the data and digital leader who has the responsibilities there to be the incident controller. And I said, we're going to do an OT tabletop. He said, when do we prep? I said, shouldn't you be ready already? And it wasn't too messy, but it wasn't too clean either. But we had some things that came out of it, some lessons learned. Number 1, determine what scenarios pose the most risk. What would be a bad day? And again, talk to your engineers, talk to your operators, talk to the other side of the org chart to understand what scenarios are of concern, what's happened in industry. Is it ransomware? Is it some nation state? Is it remote access? Is it all sorts of things? Dean Parsons, fellow SANS instructor, has done a lot of work around OT tabletops. That's available for free on the SANS website, so do have a look at that. Think about the consequence base. There's certainly a lot of work, INL, Idaho National Labs over in the States, doing a lot of work around consequence-based cyber-informed engineering. We're seeing a lot more thinking about consequence than the likelihood. I think there's a historical understanding that ICS and OT systems should be protected, should be not defended, but should be isolated, should be kept separate from our corporate enterprise IT networks. But that recovery, maybe they've got online backups, not offline backups. Maybe they haven't thought a lot about how to recover from a ransomware, for example, because I've got one spare on the shelf, but they can't replace the whole thing. Thinking about the consequence-based. And again, getting to that tabletop exercise to just flesh it out, right? Don't put that too late in your OT security journey. Put that early so you can flesh out what would a bad day look like, how we're going to manage, and you can get some really good return on investment, and hopefully you work through an incident response like on a tabletop scenario, right? Proactive, not reactive. All of the steps are going to be different. Not 100% different, not 100% the same. They've all got the same steps, generally. Sometimes we will kind of let something, not let it burn, but we'll let the malware operate in the environment if we can maintain safe and reliable plant operations. When you're security stepping into OT ICS, your outcomes and objectives are not how can we make this the most secure. It's how can we as security enable and support and sustain safe, reliable plant operations, right? And if you come in with that mindset as an enabler, then you're not going to have IT-OT divergence. You're going to have a more converged mindset about the mission. The mission of your organisation is to make things, is to produce. Looking at your threat landscape, again, we've got tools like the ICS Cyber Kill Chain, which you can see on the left-hand side there. We've got the sliding scale of cybersecurity, which applies broadly, but of course, in ICS, we're going to get much more return on investment from architecture. Building on that, having passive defence in a defensible environment. ICS networks are typically highly defensible, but not always well defended. We do need to put some defenders into that space and give them responsibilities. Can't tell you how many times I've sat down with a security team and said, who's responsible for ICS security? And they say, we're not allowed past the firewall, go talk to the ICS team. I sit down with the ICS team and I say, who's responsible for security? They say, go talk to those corporate enterprise people. They're responsible for security. You go, have you guys actually talked to each other? One example, we introduced the two teams. I had relationships on both sides. It was surreal. Building upon that, our defensible architecture, again, it is quite fundamental. It is going to give us some really good return on investment. Again, this is pretty common. That's already out there, but there's still a lot of people that need to get the control systems up their corporate network. Segmentation, segregation, again, Purdue-like models, 62443, zone and conduit, IT-OT, DMZ in the middle. You might get to something like a CPWE, which looks like this, which is a Rockwell converged plant-wide Ethernet, which is their collaboration with Cisco. It's going to be different for you regardless of your organisation. The key thing is, what is my architecture? Is it defensible? Right? What do I need to do to take it to that next step? Am I going to rip and replace? Am I going to re-VLAN every single network? Probably not. Is it going to have return on investment? Probably not. But what can we build into the next ship that's being built, the next plant that's being built, and having a defensible network and defensible architecture? How can we do some segmentation that's going to help us from security and non-security people across different places? Again, defending forward, but also kind of looking deeper into the network and how we can make sure we've got some good enablement in our architecture. Really hot topic at the moment, network and visibility monitoring. Again, our historical control systems organisations have that really good protect prevent. They've really got that likelihood reduction in place, but they don't have the detect, the identify. Sometimes I've got the respond and recover. Even if you look at NIST, respond and recover are pretty light. But it's that validating of the protective controls. Most ICS, not all, have reasonable architectures. But maybe the firewall policies have eroded over time. Maybe someone from the control systems team was responsible for putting in the firewall, which didn't have a default deny rule, and so actually the firewall's just a router. I've seen that. But actually looking at the traffic and just understanding what's going on. We've got some great organisations working through their OT network intrusion detection journey, and not just for security, but non-security means. We've got one organisation we're working with at the moment. They've got a reasonably mature ICS controls engineer who's been using the platform to detect misconfigurations, DNS, NTP, all sorts. That shouldn't be like that, that shouldn't be like that, that shouldn't be like that. They're useful for so many things. Where you put your span ports, whether you do passive or active, we could probably spend a long time down that rabbit hole. What are our remote connections? How are we validating those? How are we making sure that we know who's dialing and when? Are they meeting our remote access policy? What are our commands? Are we doing read? Are we doing read write? Getting that visibility, getting that asset inventory out of a network intrusion detection. Again, looking at where your coverage is and isn't, where have you got your gaps? Many of you might be familiar with MITRE ATT&CK. We've got a MITRE ATT&CK for ICS. This is what it looks like when you layer in some better understanding. This is Dragos, they're out in the thing, make sure you have a look at them. This is actually on their website. Let's see if I can do this in real time. So if you go to their website, you can see for the threat groups that they track, what the threat groups are doing. Demalloy, here, they use drive-by compromise from an initial access perspective. They use valid accounts from a persistence perspective. Command and control, they use commonly used ports, and they haven't been shown to have any impact in our control system environment. Loss of availability, loss of control, loss of protection, loss of safety. This one's here, Parasite. Parasite have had a bit deeper impact. If we go to Xenotime, they've been actually able to impact loss of control, loss of safety. Right? This is a threat activity group that is active in ICS. They track a number of them. Actually, you can go through on their website and see from their threat groups which ones are active in your area, right? Water in Australia, Parasite. Electric in Australia, Costivite, Demalloy, and Parasite. Right? These are adversaries that are active in Australia that are targeting OT ICS environments that you're responsible for defending. So have a think about that. Dragos are out there. I said that I better make it a little bit fair and equitable. So Nozomi's out there through the SecOL stand. Waterfall's out there with their OT unidirectional data diodes. And if you talk to the Rapid7 guys, you can get some SCADA fence advice. So just so it's fair for everybody. There are experienced practitioners working in this space that you can talk to. So in terms of our network monitoring, our Purdue-like model, we talked about Purdue a little bit yesterday, how people use it as a network architecture. It wasn't really designed to be a network architecture, but it's not bad to use it as a network architecture. It does help the thought process around how our OT and ICS environments should be catered for in networking. Again, we do see a number of different places where we want to take a look at traffic. We want to take a look at our environment. We want to understand what's going on. What are our industrial protocols telling us on normal and abnormal? Again, if we don't have a baseline, when we come in and do some incident response, do we know if that's normal or abnormal? A little bit hard to say. If we do the baseline and we've already got an adversary in our environment, maybe we would baseline out our adversary. That's always a fun thing to do. We can look at each kind of layer of our Purdue-like model and actually see kind of what's happening in our operation system layer, our supervisory control layer. Level 1 is about as low as we get. It's all kind of Ethernet networks. It's been Ethernet networks for decades. We've just got more connectivity. That's one of the major problems about the security posture, because everything's now connected. A little bit worried about Ed's comments of OT networks, especially if we're using industrial wireless. It's always going to be an interesting thing. I'll add Ed to my kind of potential threat vectors. We do know it's going to come with increased data and increased resource requirements, right? And I think one of the things that we talked about yesterday quite a bit, especially in the management conversation, was what's going to give you good risk return on investment. Your business is going to invest based on risk. Your business needs to understand where you've got legacy risk, legacy tech debt, an underinvestment in OT/ICS security, almost certainly. So actually compensating for that just to get up to where you should be, and having the right level of investment so that you can cater for at least incident response, hopefully some detection, a little bit of analysis. Not everyone's going to have a threat intel person on the team, but at least you're looking at your environment. And we can get kind of into the detailed integrated SOC, some pretty nice things around systems management for OT cybersecurity, your ISMS, a bit more consolidation around things once you go through that journey, right? But it is a maturity journey. You definitely want to kind of crawl, walk, run, and all of that's going to be unlocked by your people with the processes and technology to suit. Secure remote access, again, post-pandemic, has driven it even further. There are some organisations that exclusively say no OT remote access. If you want to come and work on our site, you have to come to our site. That might be appropriate for your organisation's risk model. It might be appropriate for your organisation's risk model to use a traditional IT remote access solution, of course, with named accounts and MFA. Maybe you've got one on the boundary, getting into the corporate enterprise, and then you've got another one jumping from the IT into the OT. Maybe you're using an OT-specific remote access solution, or you're building in some workflows around permit access, talking to operations, scheduling a time for access, those sorts of things. Again, it kind of moves and adapts over time. This is, again, through the decades. And we can see a lot more remote access, obviously, coming and being needed. I'll tell a story that I didn't tell yesterday, again, for the benefit of those that were in there yesterday. I worked on a project where we had a very specific safety system and not very common for the client I was working with. And we wanted to do simulation of that safety system in conjunction with the control system, in conjunction with a simulation environment. So this kind of digital twin concept. The only person in the world that could do simulation of that obscure safety system was based in Germany. The developers for the simulation platform were based in Australia. The vendor relationship was, in the US, the developer was in the US. The project manager was in Australia, and I was based in New Zealand with my client. Really interesting time setting those meetings, trying to cater for time zones. But without remote access, that project would be non-viable. Most minor projects are non-viable without remote access. So again, for those of you that have the responsibility for securing your industrial organisations, where have you got remote access that you don't know about? Where have you looking to enable and support the OT ICS environment with remote access? What does that look like in your own journey and your roadmap and your strategy? And for those on the technology side, how are you doing that monitoring? Is it aligned to your IT remote access strategy? Is it separate and distinct? And how are you enabling that from a technology perspective? We do have ICS-specific considerations. Quite often when we see remote access into ICS environments that haven't been segmented, again, our defensible architecture might not be in place. You might have vendor A, B, and C supporting system A, B, and C, but because of your architecture challenges, all three vendors can see all three systems and have full administrative control. I talked a little bit yesterday about system integrators. I work for a system integrator looking after the cybersecurity team. And as a system integrator, we have software, we have licenses, we have a lot of different engineering expertise, and we're wholly responsible for the engineering and design for our clients' environments. So we actually need to connect through using the vendor protocols, the vendor platforms from our side into our environment. We can't just jump into a jump host necessarily. The organisations that we support don't have the appetite or the desire to run their own engineering workstations, which is usually the solution to that problem from a security perspective. But if it's within the organisational risk tolerance, then that's not a security problem. That's not something you need to fix. Talked a lot yesterday about if your security risk is greater than your operational risk, then have those conversations with operations. Talk to them in terms of risk. Talk to them in terms of how the safe and reliable operation of your plant may be impacted through security means. Hopefully convince them that the security risks outweigh the operational risks. And actually you're putting your plant outside of your risk tolerance if you choose to accept security risk. Conversely, if your security risk is lower than your operational risk, then you need to look at compensating controls or risk acceptance and ongoing risk management, of course. It's not just risk accept and move on, but it's acknowledging that your operational risks outweigh your security risks. And that's where we get to that prioritization, right? Sometimes they align. Maybe the security around our safety system should be something that we really consider well. The segmentation around our safety system, the monitoring around our safety system is something that we really need to be cognizant of to avoid getting into a kind of crisis-like scenario. Last but not least, risk-based vulnerability management. Again, a whole topic in and of itself. In some cases, patching is necessary, but very few. Again, one of the nature of OT ICS environments is that we do care a lot about uptime. 24/7 operations, we care about uptime. Anytime that we patch, it's a self-initiated denial of service, right? So if we're going to do that, then we better be really mindful that we're not over-prioritizing our security posture over our business risk, as in the production of things. Most of the vulnerabilities aren't actually changing the risk profile. In OT and ICS, we care far more about system vulnerability than endpoint vulnerability, right? In a corporate enterprise, zero trust, buzz space, obviously our endpoint vulnerability is our system vulnerability, but in our OT environment, our systems are systems, how they're vulnerable is what we really want to consider. ICS CERT, out of Department of Homeland Security, CISA, they've got a patch evaluation process. Dale Peterson has an ICS patch decision tree. The key takeaway is think about your vulnerability spaces, weed out the vulnerabilities that don't matter, and only for the small percentage that we care about do we have that conversation with operations. Do we say, actually, we're just going to patch the boundary firewall, you're going to lose PI, you're going to lose visibility into the corporate enterprise, but our firewall is maintaining our protect, prevent, our M&M, hard out of shell, soft GUI center of our ICS. So we want to make sure that we preserve that. And here's our planning for that. This is what we're expecting to happen. This is what can go wrong. This is how we're going to recover, right? That's our permitting thing that we're pretty good with in control systems and operations. But making sure you work through that process so that you're taking that entire vulnerability space down to the little one. Again, one of the criticisms I have of, like, some of the big four, top four are not too bad, but it is a really easy metric to say the ICS is vulnerable. Guess what? It doesn't really matter too much as long as we've got some other good controls around it. Of course, none of that happens in a vacuum. It does need that steering and direction, does need that leadership, does need those conversations. Again, we do a lot of talking with organisations, talking with leaders around how they can invest, how they can communicate in terms of risk. We don't need our own risk register, we use the organisation one. We don't need our own risk matrix, we use our organisation's one. We've got to have investment. We know historically we haven't. And of course, security is not a destination, it's a journey. Right? So here we are on our ICS security journey. Maybe we're at the beginning or the middle, or we're further down the journey and we're feeling like we've got some things under control. Maybe we can start to look at further investments and further initiatives, more than the basics. But again, it doesn't take much to say that the basics in security get you a long way. So that's our 5 critical controls. I think that's about me. Again, I'm a SANS instructor. I'm coming back for 5 and 5 in Canberra. 418 is a really good one today that's happening there as well. We've got pen test and assessments coming up soon as a course, which is quite cool. And at SANS Cyber Defence Australia, the SANS guys out at the table if you want to know that. But without dwelling on that one, I'll open it up for Q&A.
Any questions from the audience?
Short of funding a SANS course yourself, is there any suggested resources for someone looking to transition from the traditional cybersecurity background into the OCS space?
Yes, there are. Of course, SANS courses are expensive, good return on investment, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, very important to my SANS peer. Have a look at Dale Peterson's video series. He's got the on-ramp and the fast track. Dale Peterson runs at S4X, and there's a whole bunch of videos on there around getting up to speed. The ICS Cert through Department of Homeland Security, they've got some kind of the 100W and the 210W online training, which is designed exactly for corporate enterprise people kind of getting into and having more responsibilities for ICS security. So yeah, those are two kind of free things out there. SANS has a ton of free resources, white papers, webinars, etc. Out there, of course. Of course, you can do a SANS course. You'd be more than welcome.
We've got a question from the Q&A app. They're asking about your company's presence in Australia and if you work directly with Australian-based manufacturers.
If you want to ask me a commercial question, let's just grab me out here. I'm not here to pitch. I'm very against kind of I'm not here to do sales and marketing. I'm here to help the community. Of course, I've got business cards, so ask me later if that was you.
Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Maybe a related question to what we discussed yesterday, but could you please, in brief, explain how active vulnerability scanning can, what are the, let's put it this way, what are the consequences of applying IT methods in that space to OT/IT, ICS? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Vulnerability scanning, again, from a risk-based approach, what are we trying to achieve? I put vulnerability scanning and pen testing also kind of in the same space. For most organizations, vulnerability scanning and pen testing isn't likely going to have return on investment, and you can answer the questions that you're trying to answer in better ways that don't risk your ICS OT environment. All that being said, when you're far enough down your ICS maturity journey, you understand more about your asset environment, more about your asset inventory, more about your systems, you can turn on some active polling. If you were going to use something like a Nessus, you've got to validate that all of the Windows environments in that VLAN that you're scanning are capable of taking a Nessus packet. If you are going to do that, have you talked to operations, got your permits? If you're using, for example, like a Nozomi, Secol, we've got some Nozomi stuff to turn on active polling, Tenable OT, for example, turning on active polling. Don't turn it on at the beginning as part of the pilot or early stage, but eventually once you're satisfied that your passive network detection, you've got your head around that and your handle on that, and you know with a high degree of certainty that the ICS team aren't going to blame you for everything that happens on the network from then on, then you can start to turn on some active polling and deeper understanding of your ICS environment, of your patch space, of your vulnerability space, of your network. But it only comes with return on investment kind of at the middle to late stages of your maturity journey.
We've got time for one more question. Anyone? Yep.
With regards to the CIA triad, a lot of the time availability is key. And what's your thoughts on integrity being nearly as important? Because if you can't trust your sensors, you can't trust your safety systems, then you probably shouldn't be operating.
My favourite consultant answer, it depends. It is important. It's not typically the most important. You've got to do enough to validate that you're comfortable enough with the integrity of the system. We're talking a little bit about safety systems yesterday. 61511 is a standard I'm very familiar with, which is around the functional safety of oil and gas petrochemical safety systems. 2016, I think it built in a requirement for a cyber assessment of the safety system. So you've just got to make sure that your security and safety risks, and especially where they overlap, are within your tolerance. You don't have any red flags, and you've got enough assurance that the integrity is good enough. There are tools, but yeah, hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Could you please give it up for Peter?